Wyoming Territory, August 1881. The sun had barely cleared the Absaroka Range when the sheriff rode out with a writ and 3 men behind him, dust curling at their heels like smoke. By the time they reached the Vandell ranch, Persephone Vandell was already saddling the last of her horses, her skirts tucked into worn riding pants, and her eyes set like flint. "You got until sundown," Sheriff Egan called down from his saddle, voice flat. "If the debt ain't cleared by then, we're seizing the property. That includes stock, house, and land." "My father is sick," Persephone said sharply, stepping between the sheriff and the porch where her father lay inside, breath shallow, lips cracked. "He didn't know what he signed when that banker came out here." "That may be," the sheriff said, adjusting his hat, "but the loans do. And the bank does not care about fever or memory loss." Persephone stood still while the sheriff rode off. Her father needed medicine, a doctor, food. She had none of those. What she did have, what the land still gave her, was horses. 6 of them, fine-boned, paint-spread by her father and trained by her own hand. They were the last good thing they had left. She looked down the road as dust still hung in the air. She had until sundown. The Nolan Ranch sat 2 valleys over. It was the only place that might buy horses quick and fair. She rode hard, dust and sweat streaking her face, and by the time she reached the gate, the horses behind her were lathered but steady. A tall man was stringing fence wire near the main corral, shirt clinging to his back, sweat darkening the brim of his hat. He turned when she rode in, and the breath she had been holding left her chest sharp. "Orren Nash," she said, sliding off her horse, boots hitting hard dirt. "Persephone Vandell?" he asked, surprise flickering across his face. "Been nearly 10 years. Closer to 11. He pulled off his gloves, eyes scanning the horses behind her. "You rode all the way out here to sell stock?" "I need money," she said bluntly. "Today. My father's sick. Sheriff's coming to take the ranch if I do not pay off his debt by sundown." Orren's jaw tightened. He looked at her horses again. "These are Vandell paints?" She nodded. "Trained myself. You know what they're worth." "I do," he said, stepping closer. "But I also know you would not sell them unless you were desperate." Persephone swallowed hard. "They are all I have left." He looked at her, really looked, then turned and walked toward the barn. "Come on. Let me see them move." They worked in silence. Orren tested each horse, watching gait, checking hooves, running his hand down flanks like he was reading something in their bones. When they were done, he stood, hands on his hips, face unreadable. "They are good," he said. "Too good to sell off in a panic. I will give you what I have. It is not much, but it will help." She stared at him. "What do you mean?" He walked to the tack room and came back with a leather pouch. He pressed it into her hands. "My last savings. $40. All I have not spent on feed and payroll." "That is not enough," she whispered. "I know," he said, "but it is yours." Her fingers curled around the pouch. "Why are you doing this, Orren?" He looked at her, the weight of the years behind his eyes. "Because once, when I was just a boy who did not have enough to eat, your father let me break colts in exchange for bread. And because I remember a girl who rode like lightning and smiled like she never knew fear." She looked away, throat tight. "I will come with you," he added. "We will work something out." They rode back together, the horses trotting behind them. The house was still standing, the sheriff not yet returned. Inside, her father moaned in his sleep, fever rising. Orren stepped into the room quietly, bent down, and touched the old man's forehead. "We need a doctor." "I cannot pay one," Persephone said, voice breaking. "I will get him," Orren said, already turning. "You stay here." He rode toward town without another word, dust rising behind him. Persephone stood on the porch, horses waiting in the yard, the money pouch clutched in her hands. She wanted to cry, but she could not yet. Night was falling when he returned. A doctor sat behind him on the saddle, scowling and muttering about the late hour. Orren helped the man down, then gave the horses water, his hands moving steady and quiet. Persephone watched him from the porch, her heart full and aching. "Thank you," she said when he joined her. "I will get the rest," he said softly. "We will save your land." How, she asked. He looked out toward the fields. I know someone who owes me for a favor. He trains cavalry remounts. He will take your horses, but for their full worth. I will ride out at dawn. She stared at him, heart tight. You would do that for me? He reached over and brushed dirt from her cheek. I would do a lot for you, Persephone. Their eyes held, and for a second the years between them vanished. The morning broke gray and windless. Persephone stood in the yard, sleeves rolled to the elbow, brushing down one of the remaining mares. She hadn't slept. The doctor had left before dawn, his satchel lighter, his eyes tired. Her father rested easier now, breath slower, though he hadn't woken. Orren came out of the barn with a wrapped biscuit in one hand and his saddlebags slung over his shoulder. His horse was already tacked, reins looped over the post. How far is Fort Washakie? She asked, not looking up. If weather holds, 12 hours there and back. She nodded, fingers tightening around the brush. You'll be careful. I always am. He mounted with one smooth motion, boots steady in the stirrups. She stepped back, crossing her arms against the morning chill. Orren. He paused. If they won't buy, come back anyway. His eyes held hers. I said we'd save this place. I keep my word. He rode out without another word, the sound of hooves fading down the canyon trail. Persephone stayed in the yard long after he disappeared, the horse beside her shifting gently under her hand. The cottonwoods rustled faintly behind the house, but otherwise the world was still. Inside, her father stirred once around midday. She fed him broth, wiped his forehead, and sat beside him until his breathing steadied again. The quiet pressed in hard. She thought of Orren's hands on the reins, his steady voice in the barn, the way he hadn't asked anything of her except that she let him help. The sun dipped behind the ridgeline before she heard the first rider. She stepped out, heart hammering. Not Orren. Sheriff Egan. 2 men followed him again, this time with a wagon behind them. You got the money? The sheriff asked. She held her ground. Not yet. It's coming. You know the law. Give me till moonrise. He glanced at the sky. That's not long. It's all I'm asking. The sheriff hesitated, then signaled his men to wait near the wagon. Moonrise. Then we take what's owed. Darkness gathered like smoke around the edges of the trees. She sat on the porch steps, hands clenched in her lap. The horses in the paddock shifted restlessly. Somewhere beyond the hills, coyotes called. When hoofbeats came again, they were fast and urgent. She rose before she could think, heart in her throat. Orren rode in hard, his coat streaked with trail dust, a canvas-wrapped bundle tied behind his saddle. She met him halfway across the yard. They took 3 of the horses, he said, swinging down. Paid full price. Said they'd take more in 2 weeks if I bring them myself. He handed her a leather envelope, stamped with a seal and tied with twine. She opened it with shaking fingers. Bills. Enough. She didn't speak. She didn't trust her voice. He stepped closer, watching her face. I told them about you, he said. Said you trained every one of those horses yourself. They want more just like them. She looked up, eyes wet. You didn't have to say that. I wanted to. She turned toward the porch, legs unsteady, and walked straight up to the sheriff. Here, she said, holding out the envelope. Egan opened it, counted quickly, and gave a short nod. That'll do. He tucked the money inside his coat and tipped his hat. We're done here. The wagon turned and rolled away into the dark. Persephone stood silent until their lanterns were gone. Then she turned back. Orren hadn't moved. You didn't eat all day, he said quietly, nodding toward the house. Come on. Inside, she lit the lamp and set water to boil. He cleaned his hands at the basin, then sat across the table from her, hat resting on his knee. I owe you more than I can say, she said. You don't. She looked down at her hands. I never thought I'd see you again. Neither did I. She raised her eyes. Why'd you leave? He exhaled slowly. My brother died in a mining collapse up near Rawlins. I had to take care of his wife and kid. Took me years to get clear of it. She nodded, quiet. I always meant to come back, he added. You didn't write. I didn't think I had the right. They sat in the hush that followed, the kettle beginning to steam. I missed you, she said finally, even when I hated you for going. He leaned forward, voice low. I thought about you every time I broke a colt, every time I saw a paint run wild. Her breath caught. I'm not going anywhere now, he said. Not unless you ask me to. She reached across the table, fingers brushing his. I wouldn't. The kettle whistled sharp and high, but neither of them moved. The next morning brought low clouds and the smell of wet sage. It had rained in the night just enough to darken the soil and leave the porch boards damp beneath their boots. Persephone poured water over the fire pit's coals out back and brushed her sleeve across her brow. Orren stepped out from the lean-to, shirt half-buttoned and sleeves rolled, carrying a small burlap sack. I found dried beans in the loft. Still good. Persephone nodded and took the sack from him. If I mix these with the last of the salt pork, we'll have supper. He leaned against the doorway, watching her sort the beans onto a cloth. You always did know how to stretch a meal. I had to. Even when things were good, my father never planned ahead. Orren reached for a coil of rope hanging from a nail and began untangling it. What'll you do now? I'll keep the land. That's what matters. He crouched to tighten the cinch on his saddle. There's more you could do with it than just hold on. Those horses, for one. If cavalry's interested, ranches'll be next. I don't want to breed for men who'll ride them into war. I know. But you could train for families. Traders, settlers. People who'd see them as more than tools. She let a few beans fall through her fingers. I never thought past surviving the week. You could. She looked up. And you. I'm not tied to Nolan's place the way you were here. I've been foreman too long. It's time I worked for myself. You thinking of starting over? I'm thinking of starting something that doesn't belong to someone else. She folded the cloth over the sorted beans, hands still. Would it be here? If you'd let it. He said nothing more. She said nothing either. But the space between them shifted, something steady settling there. Later, Persephone walked the fence line north of the pasture, checking for breaks. Summer storms had tugged a few posts loose, and she made mental notes of what needed replacing. She didn't hear Orren approach until he handed her a hammer and a pouch of rusty nails. She took them without a word and began resetting a post. He held it straight while she drove the nails in. You remember the year the river flooded? He asked. I was 15. We lost the calves and half the feed store washed out. You refused to leave the barn. Said you'd swim the herd to higher ground yourself if you had to. She smiled faintly. I nearly drowned trying. You didn't. You held the lead rope in your teeth and kicked like hell. She laughed just once and it caught in the wind. They worked until the light shifted westward and the clouds began to clear. By then, 3 more posts stood firm and the fence line ran straight again across the ridge. Back at the house, Orren rinsed his hands at the pump while Persephone lit the stove. He set the kettle down and leaned his hip against the table. I wired the remount station before I left yesterday. Told them you'd have another 4 horses ready within the month. Her hand paused mid-stir. You didn't ask me. No. I figured you'd say yes once you thought it through. I already have, she said. They'll be ready. I'll help. She turned then, wiping her hands on her apron. Why? Because I want to. Because I believe in what you're building here. She stepped closer, her voice low. And if I said I wanted more than your help? He didn't answer right away. He reached out, slow and sure, and pushed a loose strand of hair behind her ear. I'd say I've been waiting to hear that for 11 years. Her gaze held his steady. Then don't make me wait one more day. He kissed her then, soft and sure, the kind of kiss that came after too many years of silence and too many roads walked alone. When they parted, she rested her forehead against his. You're staying. I'm home. They ate supper with the windows open, the air smelling of wet grass and wood smoke. Afterward, Persephone stepped out to check on the horses. Orren followed, carrying a lantern. The herd moved easy through the dusk, tails flicking, shadows long across the field. She leaned into him as they stood by the gate, the lantern light catching the curve of her jaw. He rested his arm around her shoulders, the quiet between them full of promise. We'll build something good here, she said. We already have, he answered. The days that followed settled into something steady. Mornings began before the light, with Orren splitting wood while Persephone tended to the stock. The quiet between them had changed, less guarded now, the kind that came with unspoken understanding rather than distance. Persephone stood one morning near the east fence, watching the youngest mare test her footing in the corral. The sky had cleared after 3 days of wind, and the air smelled of pine and dust. "She'll take to the bit before the week's out," Orren said, slinging a saddle blanket over the rail beside her. "She's got a calm eye." "She's watching constantly," Persephone said. "Not afraid, just waiting to be sure." "She's like someone I know," he said. She didn't answer, but her lips curved slightly and she turned back toward the house. Inside, her father had begun sitting up on his own. The fever had stripped weight from his frame, but color was returning to his cheeks. He no longer needed help drinking broth, and his voice had come back, rough but clear. Orren brought him water while Persephone boiled a poultice for his joints. "She tell you the truth about her cult breaking?" her father asked, squinting up at him from the edge of the bed. "Some," Orren said, folding a cloth. "She once got thrown into the river because she wouldn't wait for me to saddle her horse." Orren grinned. "That sounds like her." "She's stubborn as a mule," her father said, then closed his eyes. "But she's all I got." Later, when Orren stepped outside, he found Persephone near the barn loft, sorting harness leather. She glanced up once, then went back to her work. "He's talking again," Orren said. "He told me the same river story last night. Seems to be proud of it." She gave a small shake of her head. "He's proud of stories, not people." Orren leaned against the doorframe. "He might surprise you." She looked past him toward the ridge where the trail curved out toward the remount station. "Maybe." That afternoon a rider came. Not a stranger, Wesley Greaves, who ran the livery in town and had once tried to buy half the valley. He dismounted with too much care, boots polished, coat free of trail dust. "Saw the remount officer in town," he said, tipping his hat. "He mentioned your horses. Said they'd taken a liking to the Vandell stock." Persephone crossed her arms. "What do you want, Wesley?" "I've got land east of here. Water's good. Grass is better." He looked at her, then at Orren. "You've got bloodlines. I've got capital. Could be a smart partnership." She didn't move. "I'd put up the money." "You'd run the stock. You'd keep a share." Orren stepped forward. "She's not interested." Greaves barely glanced at him. "I wasn't speaking to you." Persephone's voice was even when she said, "I'm not for hire and I'm not for sale." "You think you can keep this place running on pride?" Greaves asked, jaw tightening. "You got lucky once. That doesn't last. Then I'll fail on my own terms." Greaves looked between them, his mouth drawn tight. "You'll regret this." He rode off without waiting for a reply. Persephone stayed by the fence, arms still crossed. "You all right?" Orren asked. She nodded, eyes narrowed toward the trail. "He used to bring whiskey to my father. Said it was neighborly." "You ever think about taking offers like his?" "Once. Then I realized I'd be working for a man who thought he owned everything he touched." Orren rested a hand on the fence rail. "You don't owe anyone an explanation." She looked over at him, the wind catching her hair. "I don't want a partner who thinks he's doing me a favor. I want someone who'll work beside me. Even when it's cold. Even when it's bad." "You have that," he said. The words fell quiet between them, but they settled deep. That evening she brought out a ledger and spread it across the table. Orren pulled a stool beside her, scanning the columns with a careful eye. "There's more here than I thought," he said. "I kept records. Even when things were tight. You're better prepared than most townsmen." She dipped the pen in ink. "Tell me what we need to add if we're going to build this together." He didn't hesitate. "We'll need another 2 mares. And someone who can drive a wagon. I can ask around." She wrote in the margins. "We'll need salt, oats, and a new wheel rim. I'll take the wagon into town tomorrow." She paused. "I'll go with you." They both looked up at the same time. After a moment, she smiled. "You'll need someone who knows which wheel rim to buy." He gave a soft laugh. "I'd be glad for it." The light from the lamp warmed the room, casting long shadows over the table and the papers between them. Outside, the wind had died and the night stretched quiet and wide. Persephone rested the pen, her hand brushing his. "I'm glad you came back." He turned his hand over, lacing his fingers through hers. "I'm not going anywhere." The wagon rattled over the uneven trail as the sun climbed behind them, casting long gold across the brush. Persephone sat beside Orren, gloved hands braced against the bench. her braid tucked through the collar of her coat. The fields fell away behind them, the house barely a speck now, and the horses trotted steady, dust rising in small clouds beneath their hooves. Orren glanced at her once as they passed a stand of wind-worn cedars. "You ever think we'd come back to this?" She watched the horizon. "To what?" "Riding out together. Building something that's ours." She didn't answer right away. The wagon hit a rut, and she steadied herself with one hand on the seat rail. "I didn't think I'd be allowed to want it," she said finally. "Not after everything." He nodded once, eyes on the trail. "You're allowed. You always were." They reached town by mid-morning. The general store still bore the painted sign from a decade earlier, though the roof had been patched and the hitch rail replaced. A boy with a crooked hat held the door open for them, gawking at the team as they passed. Inside, the store smelled of kerosene and dried apples. Persephone stepped straight to the counter, nodding at the clerk, a woman not much older than herself with a ledger open in front of her. "I need a rim for a freight wheel," Persephone said. "Iron, 36 inches. And a new tarpaulin." The woman jotted quickly. "You'll want that custom. I can send a wire to Lander." "I'll wait." While she settled the account, Orren gathered the rest: oats, salt, lamp oil, and a new bridle strap. He met her near the door, arms full. "Anything else?" he asked. "No," she said, then tilted her head toward the back. "Actually, one thing." They walked together into the far end of the store, past barrels of nails and bins of seed. At the back stood a glass case of small household goods: buttons, thread, tin cups. Persephone pointed to a plain ivory-handled brush. "For my father. His old one cracked." Orren nodded and flagged the clerk. "We'll take that too." They loaded the wagon in quiet efficiency, the sun now high overhead. As they climbed back onto the bench, Persephone looked toward the edge of town where the livery stood. The door was shut, but she could see the tip of Greaves's white hat inside. "Reckon he'll try again?" she asked. Orren flicked the reins. "He'll try someone else. He always does." The trail home wound higher, the horses slowing as the grade steepened. Persephone pulled her coat tighter as the wind picked up. "Do you miss it?" she asked. "The part of life that was just your own?" He considered that. "I had years of it. It never felt full. Just quieter." She looked at him, steady. "I don't want to be your second start." "You're not," he said. "You're the only one I ever looked back for." The words settled over her like warm cloth. She didn't reply, but she reached for his hand, resting it lightly over his where he held the reins. The horses crested the final hill just as the sun began to dip. The house came into view, smoke curling from the chimney, the corral gate swinging gently in the breeze. Her father sat on the porch in the rocking chair they'd pulled out 2 days earlier, wrapped in a woven blanket. He raised a hand as they approached, and Persephone jumped down before the wagon had fully stopped. She handed him the brush without a word, and he turned it over in his hands, nodding. "That'll do," he said. "Better than the last one by a mile." Orren untied the tarpaulin and began unloading supplies. Persephone joined him, her movements practiced and sure. They worked until the sun was nearly gone, the shadows long and the air thick with the scent of pine smoke. That night, after supper, she stood at the edge of the porch while Orren fed the lantern. Her father had gone to bed early, the new brush set neatly beside the wash basin. Orren stepped up beside her, the lantern casting light across his jaw, catching in the lines near his mouth. "He won't say it," she murmured. "But I think he's glad you're here." "I didn't come for him." She looked up. "Then why did you come?" He set the lantern down on the rail. "Because I couldn't stand the thought of you doing all this alone. Because I remembered you standing in that flood, too stubborn to let go. Because when I thought about where I wanted to be, it was always here. With you." She stepped closer, her coat brushing his. "Then stay. Build this with me. Not just the ranch, the rest." "I already am," he said, voice low. "I already chose you." She kissed him then, soft, Slow. The kind of kiss that said the waiting was over. The kind that felt like home being built from the ground up. The next morning, they rode out together before dawn, checking the southern fence line before the frost lifted. By week's end, they had a new wheel rim fitted. The remount officer had wired approval for 4 more horses, and her father had begun walking the length of the porch without help. 3 weeks later, they stood under the cottonwood tree behind the barn, hands clasped, while a traveling preacher read from a worn leather book. The ceremony was short, simple. Her father stayed seated, a blanket across his knees, but his eyes were clear and present. Afterward, Orren took her hand and helped her onto the porch step where they shared bread, boiled coffee, and a slow dance to whistles and laughter from 2 neighboring families who'd come to witness. That night, as the lantern burned low and the horses settled in the paddock, Persephone sat beside Orren on the bed they'd built together from pine and iron. Her head rested against his shoulder, his arm around her waist. "We did it," she said. "We'll keep doing it," he replied. Outside, the wind moved gently through the trees. Inside, their quiet breathing filled the space between walls built on grit, hope, and the slow, strong kind of love that lasts. Spring came early the next year. They planted a small orchard near the southern slope, just 5 trees to start. The horses foaled strong, the remount buyers returned with gold and praise, and the herd grew by 6 that summer. Orren built a second barn with his own hands. Persephone taught a neighbor girl how to gentle a colt without fear. Her father passed that autumn in his sleep, his hand resting on a worn photograph of his wife. They buried him beneath the cottonwood. Life didn't get easier, but it grew fuller. And every morning, before the sun cleared the ridge, Orren reached for Persephone's hand beneath the quilts, and she held it like she meant to keep it all her days. And she did.